Thanks for the nice introduction, both Anuj and Aryan. Great job. So, my name is Jana, and I'm going to talk a little bit about uh, what we can potentially look at some frontiers in terms of improving the capabilities of these Gen AI models. And reinforcement learning has been one of these recipe that actually enabled some of it. So I'll start off with some introduction to RL, and then I'll talk about some promising directions that could lead to some new capabilities in the context of science and engineering applications. So let's talk about the moment that we went from GPT to Chat GPT. And the main ingredient from GPT to Chat GPT, like Aryan was alluding to, was this reinforcement learning from human feedback. So the idea was that there were some prompts, then there were basically some responses, and you collect data from humans that would actually tell which response was better than an alternative response, right? So you collect a lot of such preference data, and then you use some sort of supervised learning to learn a reward model, and then you plug that reward model into a reinforcement learning algorithm to create this kind of capability. So that's called RLHF, which is in short reinforcement learning from human feedback. And those of you who don't know about reinforcement learning, so this is one quick slide. So the main difference between reinforcement learning and standard supervised learning is that in standard supervised learning, you are given actually an answer to every problem, and you are trying to mimic that behavior. On the other hand, in reinforcement learning, you're not told what the right answer is. So the agent is in an environment, and the agent has to try some strategies or solutions to figure out which solutions are better. And that's the solution for a reinforcement learning problem is what is called a policy, which is at any given state, the policy would tell you what action or the decision to take. And the way it happens is it's kind of a trial and error process where the agent takes an action at a state, gets a reward or penalty for that action, and then it updates its strategy. So it is almost like learning by acting in that world. So to put that in context here, so what we do here is you have this LLM, and the LLM generates responses, and the humans provide feedback like thumbs up or thumbs down, where they give some feedback for which responses they prefer better, and you can use the standard RL on this. Now, when you take this to reasoning tasks, for example, I gave you a couple of examples here where there is a math word problem and also a programming problem where a prompt is given and the LLM has to generate the corresponding code. Even in these cases, if you have a computational verifier, which basically means that for the reasoning problem that you are trying to solve, you have a way to figure out whether the answer is correct or not. For example, in the context of code, you might have unit tests, and you can run the code on those unit tests and basically say, either give a Boolean binary signal where you say, well, this answer is correct. Or you say some numeric value, like, okay, it passed, so what fraction of the unit tests, and so on, right? So the computational verifier can actually drive, is the supervisor signal that can help you improve these models on these reasoning tests. And there are many such examples like OpenAI O1, DeepSeek R1, Cloudase Extended Thinking. So these are all examples of these reasoning model. And I would say RL in generative AI is still very nascent. And I would like to argue in today's talk is that many science and engineering problems have some unique challenges compared to the kind of reasoning problems that I just showed you. And that should inspire new RL ideas. And that's what the focus of my talk is. And I'm going to start my talk with an inspiration from Marvin Minsky. Marvin Minsky is actually a very, very quotable person. He's a Turing Award winner. And in his book called Society of Mind in 1986, he said, intelligence is shifting the test part of generate test into generation. And throughout my talk, I'm going to talk about, some ways we can actually realize this insight in the context of learning and reasoning in GenAI models. So the first direction is integration of knowledge. So if you kind of abstract out everything, all you can say is that given an LLM, it can generate some candidate hypotheses, right? So let's say there are some top K hypotheses. And ideally, what we want is that based on all the facts and knowledge that a domain scientist know, every hypothesis that is generated in this top K should be consistent with those facts and prior knowledge, right? Otherwise, it's a missed opportunity. So the question is, how can we do that? So if you have such facts and knowledge written down, you can think about it as a black box procedure called knowledge verifier, where you put in all these facts and rules, and every time a hypothesis is generated, you pass it as an input to this knowledge verifier, and knowledge verifier could provide you a binary signal where it says, well, this hypothesis is consistent with my known facts and knowledge. Or it could give you a numeric signal where it says, well, it violates these many facts or existing rules. And that could be the reward function that could actually drive the training of these models. The second aspect is that even though you had a knowledge verifier, which actually provided the supervisor signal, you might still not be able to learn a model that will always be consistent with the knowledge. There is no guarantee, at least for some forms of knowledge. So in that case, what you can do is, even during your inference, right, you can actually put this knowledge verifier in the loop. As you generate, you can get feedback from this knowledge verifier, and you can update the reasoning strategy when you are generating these candidate hypotheses, right? So both at training and inference, you can do it to actually always generate these consistent hypotheses. There is one more idea that I wanted to actually touch upon, which could be very complementary to this other view, is if you think about all these reasoning and exploration that is happening, you can think about, okay, you can do the standard greedy decoding, and it might be fairly good. And only at some, very fork in the road kind of decisions, if it gets it wrong, the errors can propagate and you can get very bad hypotheses. So you can actually use that insight to basically see, can you do some intelligent search around this greedy decoding or the greedy policy so that you can actually explore this large combinatorial space much more intelligently? And I'm going to just list a couple of papers here. Unfortunately, the first paper, actually, I consider it as a very, very good paper. Unfortunately, the community didn't pick up. It's called Choice Function Framework for Online Policy Improvement, although it's not written in the context of LLMs, but I think the ideas from that paper are actually very, very relevant for this. In fact, if you know about AlphaGo, I mean, they tried basically supervised learning, and the greedy policy initially was not good enough, and they had to wrap basically the Monte Carlo tree search around the greedy policy to the winning agent. And the other idea I would also touch upon is what is called limited discrepancy search. It's actually one of my own paper from my PhD work. And in fact, I was able to find, this was like before overleaf era, right? So I was actually very, very happy last night. I was able to find the PDF of this paper, okay? So this was a paper that I submitted to NIPS 2011. I mean, that's what NeurIPS was before. And my title was Learning to Search at Test Time for Classifier-Based Structured Prediction. So in fact, I would argue that this paper actually, or this line of direction, started the whole test time search. Unfortunately, the paper got rejected and we resubmitted, and it led to a lot of good research. So the second direction that I would argue is what is called adaptive experimentation. So all the successes that we have seen so far assumes that there is actually a verifier that can actually tell you what the right answer is, right? Whenever you actually generate a solution, whether it is the correct or not. But in lots of scientific applications, when you have candidate hypotheses, right, there is no computational procedure that would actually tell you whether this is the right material or what property it would have, unless you actually make that material and evaluate in a physical lab, right? And the reason, because these science applications, these experiments are actually expensive. They need to be conducted by humans, and they also consume physical resources. You cannot just use them as you have done in the traditional games or a computational verifier. So you have to be very, very careful about on what queries you want to actually find the answer. So you have to be very intelligent about it. And that's where the adaptive experimentation tools can be pretty useful. And it's actually a very unexplored area, even in the context of general LLMs, not just in the context of science applications. In fact, there is a new paper at Column which talks about the sample efficient preference alignment. And I'm actually very proud that it's actually written by one of my former students who is a postdoc in Stefano Ehrman's group at Stanford. And one thing that I would actually tell you, I was working on a AAAI fellow nomination for Alan Fern this summer, and I was trying to kind of write, the impact of some of his RL research. And this was actually a paper written in NIPS 2012. This was actually my lab mate, Aaron Wilson. And at that time, there was actually a research program going on, like, okay, RL has been very, very popular in games, right? Where you can always reset and actually try many, many times. But when it comes to RL for humans or any kind of real world domains where you're kind of trying to design strategies where limited exploration is possible, you need to be sample efficient. And this paper talks about actually one search strategy called how do you get preferences from trajectory to learn policies in a more efficient manner through humans. In fact, I was actually trying to look at the RLHF paper to see if actually this paper was cited or not, but this is exactly the formulation behind the RLHF paper. Okay, so the point I was trying to make through this is that there are lots of good ideas in the literature, and if the community goes back beyond the last 5 years, I think you will find a lot of gold, and you can actually try to reuse in the context of these ideas. So the other thing adaptive experimentation can be useful is, there is a lot of excitement about discovering new rules and new laws and new knowledge, right? And both from, passive data, which was already collected, but also doing some new experiments to validate them. I think you can use adaptive experimentation in a more efficient manner to learn such rules. And then you combine these new rules that are discovered into the knowledge integration framework to further improve the capabilities of these LLMs. The third direction I'm going to talk about is there is a need to improve the reasoning capabilities of these GenAI models. So you might see a lot of papers which kind of talks about, okay, in spite of all these capabilities, the LLMs actually don't do well on lots of reasoning and planning tasks. So I'm actually listing a couple of things. So there was a recent paper from DeepMind, and Subbarao Kamampati, who is a faculty member at Arizona State University over the last 5-6 years, he has written a whole bunch of papers which kind of talks about why LLMs still cannot plan or reason. And one key limitation of these tools is that they cannot perform deductive reasoning, right? Which is a very, very basic reasoning mechanism all humans use, like the ability to derive new facts and knowledge from existing facts and rules, which I would argue it's a fundamental aspect of intelligence. Through just forward chaining, you can actually get all of this. But, you can see LLMs as doing some sort of case-based reasoning. So they have some known solutions in their database, and they kind of stitch together based on the prompt that you provide, but they really don't perform deductive reasoning in any kind of formal sense. So another promising direction is, especially when you have very large state and action spaces, when you kind of talk about proofs and so on, instead of using a flat RL algorithm, you can use what is called hierarchical reinforcement learning. So the idea is that you kind of divide your bigger problem into smaller problems, and you have policies that would solve each of those sub goals or sub problems, right? So it's like a standard divide and conquer strategy that allows you to solve complex reasoning problems which require reasoning over many steps. And in fact, this is actually one of the first papers written by Tom Dietrich on hierarchical RL. And I would consider this is probably the best contribution he has made in machine learning. And there are some recent attempts at using hierarchical RL in the context of improving the reasoning capabilities of these GenAI models. I just listed a couple of them, but there is a lot of room for a lot of work in this direction. So to summarize my talk, I kind of talked about Marvin Minsky's insight that intelligence is about shifting the test part of the generate test into the generation, right? You can think about this as almost a speed up learning problem where, as you learn more, your reasoning capabilities becomes faster per unit time. Sometimes people talk about this as system 2 thinking versus system 1 thinking. And then I gave you 3 directions. One is integration of knowledge at both training and inference, adaptive experimentation, where the verifier, you have to actually do an expensive physical experiment, and then some strategies to improve the reasoning capabilities of these GenAI models. Thank you.